Welcome, welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host. Today I'm thrilled to have as my guest health researcher, documentary film producer, and best-selling author, Mr. Ty Bollinger. After losing several family members to cancer, including his mother and father, Ty began a quest to learn all he possibly could about alternative cancer treatments and the medical industry. He's the author of several best-selling books, including The Truth About Cancer, and has produced a successful documentary miniseries on the same theme. Ty Bollinger, welcome to the EMF Health Summit.
Lloyd, thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate the invite. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So my first question, very simply, is when did you first become aware of the dangers of electromagnetic fields? Because I think everybody's got like an aha moment about this. When was that for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, Lloyd. It's hard for me to pinpoint the exact time, but it probably would have been 2008, 2009 time period. I wrote a book on cancer. I've written several books over the last decade. The first book I published was entitled Cancer, Step Outside the Box. I published it in 2006. And it was a book about cancer and natural treatments for cancer, and kind of went into the cancer conspiracy, our treatments being suppressed. But I didn't have anything about EMFs in that book. Didn't know anything about them. I was totally oblivious to the fact that they could be dangerous. And over the next couple of years after that book was published in 2006, people began to contact me and say, hey, why didn't you talk about EMFs? What about radiation from cell phones? What about all this wireless technology now? And so that was really what made me aware of it. It was kind of like a sin of omission for me, right? I didn't include it, and people brought it to my attention, said, why didn't you include it? So I started looking at it and found out, wow, maybe one of the top 2 or 3 carcinogenic topics to discuss today, and it wasn't even in my original version of the book because I didn't know about it, but that was about the time period.
Yeah. So that positions it nicely, the debate we're going to have today, that your opening statement there about being in the top 2 or 3 carcinogenics. But I was actually, because this is the first time we've met, the first time we spoke, we have interacted a little bit by email, but very little really. So we're discovering one another. But I do my diligent research before I have my guests on. And I was on your website. I was reading that when you were younger, when you were a child, I think, that you did have some kind of electrical sensitivity. That's to say, you could sense things being switched on in the house.
I don't know if it was a sensitivity or a paranoia, but yeah, I was always very aware of lights being on and off, and things being plugged in and unplugged and so forth. So maybe that is electrical sensitivity. But yeah, at a young age, maybe I didn't know what it was called at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in terms of the science, and the EMF science, and there is quite a lot of science on this now. And part of this summit, I'm going to be interviewing so many people who are scientists who just do this, work on the science, create the science. I'd like to know, what is your understanding of how EMFs affect our bodies, the mechanisms, these biological mechanisms that are at play? What's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm not a scientist, so I'll kind of communicate it from maybe what you would consider to be the layperson's point of view, right? Because I do a lot of research, but I'm definitely not a scientist, and so I'll try not to speak too scientifically because I don't know all the scientific terms anyway. But the reality is EMFs, electromagnetic fields, they've been around forever, right? Since the beginning of time, right? The sun emits electromagnetic fields, but it wasn't until mankind began to learn how to generate electricity, and we had all these technological breakthroughs like light bulbs, right? Which it's a good thing. I mean, a lot of good has come from inventions, but there's always a dark side to it as well. So it wasn't until that, maybe 100 years later, we now enjoy all these technological advancements that are completely dependent upon high-performing computers, microwave ovens, and a whole bunch of other types of electromagnetic and wireless types of technologies. So, again, when I discuss EMFs today, I'll be discussing man-made EMFs as opposed to the natural EMFs that, say, the sun emits. Now, as I understand it, the National Institute of Environmental Sciences classifies EMFs into two different types or two different groups. You've got low frequency EMFs, and then you've got high frequency EMFs. And the low frequency is like, visible light, I think, is considered a low frequency EMF, but then you've got microwave ovens and computers and smart meters, right? Which I would argue ain't so smart, but they're called smart meters, and Wi-Fi and cell phones. That's low frequency. And then you've got high frequency EMFs, which is something other than visible light, which is like ionizing radiation, which is what a mammogram is. It's ionizing radiation it's bizarre, Lloyd. They use ionizing radiation, which is a known carcinogen, to detect cancer.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. Maybe I'm not a doctor. Maybe that makes sense to a doctor. Doesn't make sense to me. But you've got ultraviolet light, actually, is high frequency. And other types of X-rays, right? High frequency. Gamma rays are high frequency, which is exactly why the Incredible Hulk turns into the Green Man, right? Is the gamma rays. Yeah. But those are different types of EMFs, as I understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so absolutely right there. And what you're referring to is this kind of crazy notion that we have this non-ionizing, we have this ionizing radiation, this gamma radiation, this nuclear radiation, this high frequency, which is dangerous. And then we have this other category, which has really the same qualities, just a question of less energy, which we call non-ionizing, which is not dangerous. And this is what the scientists, what certain scientists, or what the mainstream have been, what our governments are wanting us to believe, basically. And obviously, this is wrong. It doesn't work like that. It just does not work like that.
Right. And I think one of the fallacies, Lloyd, is that you'll hear, the cell phone radiation, the non-ionizing radiation is safe, right? You hear that a lot. I mean, we heard that about fluoride in the water is good for teeth as well. We heard it was not carcinogenic until we found out that it was. And we saw doctors in the 1940s promoting cigarettes as healthy for lung health until we found out that they caused cancer. So I think this mantra that, cell phone radiation is safe, the non-ionizing radiation is safe, it's because there's not research saying that it's safe. There's just a lack of research or questionable research saying that it's unsafe.
Yeah.
So then by default, it must be safe since we don't have the research to say that it's not safe. But the reality is we do have a lot of research that shows that it's not safe. I mean, if you go back to one of the first books that I'm aware of that I referenced in, I think it was the second edition of my book of Cancer Step Outside the Box, it was about radiation from cell phones. And I think the man's name was George Carlo. He wrote a book called Invisible Hazards in the Modern World, or something to that effect. And it was in the late 80s. He was commissioned by one of the Bell telephone companies out on the West Coast of the United States. And this was when the cell phones were first becoming popular. And they commissioned him. They wanted him to prove that it was safe. That was what they wanted. But his research, independent research, actually showed that it was actually causing cancer and brain tumors and so forth. So they kind of buried the study and fired him. They didn't want, but he published the research later in his book. But they kind of disbanded the study because that's not the results that they wanted.
Correct.
So we do have a lot of research starting back in the 80s all the way to present day showing that at least the cell phone radiation is possibly carcinogenic. I think it was the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is an arm of the World Health Organization. I think it was 2011 or 2012.
2011.
They classified cell phone radiation as possibly carcinogenic. Now, since that time, we've had other researchers that actually worked for the World Health Organization, one of which was Dr. Anthony Miller. And he's come out and said, hey, it's not just possibly carcinogenic. It should be classed as a group 1 carcinogen. Correct. Because we know that cell phone radiation causes cancer. So the research is out there that cell phone radiation either possibly causes it or we know it causes it, but it's definitely not benign in any instance.
Yeah. And that is really the kind of the $1 million question, isn't it? because everybody loves cell phones. Like everybody on the planet's got one, I think, except me. Um,
Yeah.
and they are great devices, you know.
Mhm.
Wow. I mean, I love gadgets, so I totally get it. Seductive technology, very powerful. You can do so much with it. And, you know, when I travel, particularly if I travel on my own, then I take a cell phone with me. I borrow one, you know, because, you know, in this day and age, honestly, I mean, there's jobs you cannot do without a cell phone. And so the $1 million question is, in a lot of people's minds, do cell phones cause cancer? But I think, well, personally, and you're the cancer guy, okay? In my mind, you're the cancer guy. But really, my question is because cancer is like, it's this fear word, isn't it? You know, you say cancer and it's, boy, it shoots fear into people's hearts. So my question is this really, from what you've been looking at of this research, of you know, the EMFs and the biological effects, because there are so many, so you've got the bioeffects which then lead to the disease, yeah, all these various diseases, and there are many of them, you know, infertility, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease. So my question is, you know, is cancer really what we should be looking at, or is it, you know, these other effects really where perhaps the strongest science is?
It's a good question. And first of all, Laura, let me commend you that you don't have a cell phone. I do. Okay, I can't do business without it. I travel all the time. But you being in this field and doing this summit, you know, it's nice to see someone that's practicing what they're preaching, right? So it would be like, you know, if I'm going to do a GMO summit and the guy that I'm interviewing with is eating GMO food while we're doing the interview, that's a little bit less impressive. So I appreciate the fact that you're practicing what you're preaching. I wish I could do business without a cell phone, but I can't at this point. But that's commendable. And we know, you know, that the human body is a sophisticated electromagnetic system, right? Yeah. I mean, our nervous system, our heart runs on electricity, right? I mean, that's why you can shock a heart with the defibrillator and knock it back into working, right? Because it's electric. And I think it was back in the late 60s that they first detected the magnetic fields from the human heart and the brain. So it's not only electric, it's a magnetic system. So, and you know, the mitochondria, the liver enzymes, they're all based on electrical conductivity and light energy. So we have our entire body runs on light energy, on electricity, on magnetic waves to some extent or the other. And I mean, even the Earth has its own magnetic field, right? That's why you can use a compass to figure out where the North Pole is. So the reality is, I think what we should be looking at is cancer is a symptom that something has gone wrong in the body, right? Cancer, and so I'm going to step back for a second and say, okay, when somebody's diagnosed with cancer, the doctor, if you're going to a conventional oncologist, they're going to say, well, you have a tumor. Let's do what we can to shrink the tumor, or with the radiation, or let's poison the tumor with chemo, or let's cut it out with surgery. Well, that's fine and dandy if the tumor is the problem, but the reality is the tumor is a symptom that something's gone wrong in the body, whether it's immune system failure or whether it's an inability for the body to communicate because the electrical system has been interrupted, potentially with electromagnetic fields and EMF radiation. Maybe that's what resulted in a tumor because your cells can't talk to each other. So I think the reality is we should be asking what caused the cancer, not be so quick to, well, let's cut it out or shrink the tumor and say that we are in remission, when the reality is the cancer always comes back. I mean, I can't count the number of cancer patients over the years, Lloyd, that have contacted me, or their family, unfortunately, has contacted me and said, my mom, my dad, my relative was diagnosed. They did chemo, radiation, surgery. They were told that they were in remission, and now the cancer's back and it's all over the body, or they died recently because the cancer spread. Well, why did that happen? Because we treat symptoms and we don't get to the root causes. And so I think we should be looking at the root causes of cancer, which one of the main root causes might just be EMFs.
Yes.
But the fact that they were disrupting the body's electrical currents, the electrical flow of energy. The mitochondria are electric. That's where the energy are generated. And we just produced a documentary with our good friend, Dr. Marlene Siegel. She was in it, The Truth About Pet Cancer. And many doctors and veterinarians went over the mitochondria link to cancer and how cancer results from damaged mitochondria. And we know that EMFs can damage mitochondria. So maybe that's one of the missing links we should be looking for, instead of being so anxious to cut a tumor out and then tell the cancer patient they're healed.
Yeah. And there is, everything is pointing to this link between cell phone radiation and EMFs generally and cancer. But on the other hand, we've got the cell phone industry, which are doing an awfully good job of producing other studies which are showing something different. So understandably, people are really confused about this.
They are. And like I said, back in the 40s and 50s, you can still see the newspaper ads online. If you go look for doctors and cigarettes, they would use doctors as the poster children to show you that cigarettes didn't cause cancer and that they were actually healthy. I've seen an ad that says a pack a day keeps lung cancer away. It wasn't a spoof. It was a real ad that was run in the magazines. Well, now we know that the tobacco industry was lying through their teeth for several decades, and we know that that was causing cancer now. And the same thing is going to happen with cell phones in the next couple of decades.
So you have a cell phone, as you said to me, and you, like many people, you need a cell phone to do your job, yeah, because like everybody's like communicating with these, there's so many different ways of communicating now with a cell phone. Because before, you just used to put the thing next to our ear, and that was the only way, by talking. But now there's other means and other ways, non-cellular ways, Bluetooth and so on, ways of connecting with a cell phone. So my question, Ty, is, what do you do? So you're aware of this science, you're aware of the dangers, and it's very, it's pretty clear in your mind from what you're saying here. My question is, what do you do in your life? What are your tips here? What tips can you share, people that are listening that want to protect themselves from cell phone radiation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lloyd. Number one is keep your distance from the cell phone, right? So I'm in my house today. Unless I'm traveling, I never have the cell phone on my body, ever. When I'm traveling, I'll try to keep it in a pocket of a coat that's not on me. If I have to put it in my pocket, it's only for a short period of time. But you see men that always have a cell phone in their front or back pocket, and you see women that'll take a cell phone and stick it in their bra or whatever. So that's crazy. Don't do that. Keep your distance, because there's a limited range of that, the dirty electricity, the EMF from those cell phones. It doesn't go forever. That's why sometimes you can't get a signal, right? We're all exposed to radiation to an extent or another, especially if you're in a big city. So one of the things that we did as a family, we bought a house way out in the country. Yeah. So I can hardly get a cell signal here, which is really kind of bad for business, but it's great because of the fact I know that there's not a lot of radiation here. But if you're in a big city, like if you're in New York City and there's like 4G LTE everywhere, and there's 3,000 towers within 10 miles or whatever, some insane amount of cell phone towers. I mean, you're getting pelted all the time. So you got to do what you can. You can't avoid that. So do what you can when it comes to your own cell phone on your body. Don't put it on your body. And I don't even know where my cell phone is. It's in the house somewhere. I will typically check it 2 or 3 times a day. And if I do get a message, I don't talk on my cell phone. I'll put it on speaker or I'll text. So I keep it away from my body. So I think those are two good tips. Keep it away from your body, talk on the speaker, try to text as much as you can. And then if it's close to you at night, unless you use it as an alarm clock, turn it off.
Yeah.
Right? So, because you're not going to get the radiation when it's turned off. Okay. So those are good tips. You can use a shielding device. I actually use a shielding device on mine too, that and I can't remember what the particular brand is. I don't have any financial interest in it anyway, but you close it up and you strap it, and I've seen the scientific tests on it that show that it pretty much kills the radiation, right? It also makes it where sometimes you can't receive the signal when it's in there, and then when it pops in, a whole bunch of messages pop in, which is fine because I'm not on it all day myself anyway. So there's just a few times each day that I'll check the cell phone to see if anybody's messaged me. Yeah. And also, one of the things you mentioned earlier is Bluetooth. Limit the Bluetooth use. We think that Bluetooth are safe, but they're not, right? Bluetooth actually creates a second type of danger that's not with just a cell phone, because, one of the things you can do, I know that you wanted to talk about Bluetooth, so if you want to, we can go ahead and talk about Bluetooth.
Yeah, please. Yeah, because obviously Bluetooth is, again, it's this really sexy technology. You can talk with, on your cell phone without having the cell phone with you. But yeah, so what's your take on this?
Well, the Bluetooth actually transmits the frequency at the same gigahertz level, I think, that your microwave does. So it's basically microwave radiation in your ear. It's right there on you. And if you're using, there's different classes of Bluetooth. I don't have a Bluetooth, and I haven't done a lot of research into Bluetooth to know all the different levels, but I think there's class 1, 2, and 3 Bluetooths. Right. Most of the ones that people use are class 1 because they're more powerful. They're 40 or 50 times more powerful than a class 2, which means they're 40 to 50 times more dangerous, more radiation.
Yes.
So you're actually exposing your brain, your head, to more radiation when you're using a powerful Bluetooth, because your cell phone acts as a relay, basically, that emits radiation between the cell phone tower and your phone, right? And you're in the Bluetooth. So when you add the Bluetooth into the equation, your cell phone's actually emitting another kind of radiation. So it's basically like double the damage with a Bluetooth. But there are like they call them blue tubes. They use air to conduct. So those are a lot less damaging. So if you want to use something for as a headset, and I think they're called blue tubes. I don't know the different brands, but I know that they use air to conduct, and those are less harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. You're quite correct. And it's air tube, and the difference is, unlike most headsets, it's not a wire all the way. The wire's broken. There's a section of air tube in it, and so we don't get that. We don't get that link between the radiation emitting device in your brain, because otherwise that whole wire is acting like an antenna and it's zapping it straight up to your brain, like, it's like a super highway up there. And so, what you're saying is quite correct. And this Bluetooth, again, because the technology is awesome, and that's why people love it, because it's wireless. Wireless is great, but it's another layer of radiation. It's another layer of EMFs. And all this is cumulative. It's all adding to this electro pollution, which, even though you can't feel it, most people can't feel it. I know about this because that's how it all started for me. One day, just out of the blue, boom, I got a reaction to my cell phone, and that was it. And so I deserve no medal for not having a cell phone. It's just because I couldn't have a cell phone for years, and now I can, but I choose not to because, well, firstly, I never want to go back there, never, ever, ever again. And secondly, because, even if I'm not feeling this anymore, then I know that there's a huge price to pay in terms of my health and, those people that are around me. Because it's not only yourself when you're using these technologies, it's people around you. According to one report, you can go through like 10 people, just the power of a cell phone.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things, Lloyd, about some of the research that's been done, it's very similar to, I produced a documentary about 2 years ago now called The Truth About Vaccines.
Yeah.
Now, vaccines, this is not about vaccines, but you see hundreds, if not thousands of cases every year of parents that take their kid in to be vaccinated, and they get them vaccinated with 6 to 8 vaccines. And within a period of a day to a week, the kid's not talking. The kid regresses into autistic-like symptoms. Well, we're told that was just, a coincidence. Tens of thousands of times a year, it's just a coincidence. And not to worry, there's no danger with vaccines. Well, it's kind of the same thing that we're told with cell phones. The research is showing that the prevalence of brain tumors is 80 to 90% on the side of the head where people hold their phone. And the brain tumors start there. And we've seen this for 2 decades now, but we're told that it's just a coincidence, that there's nothing to be afraid of, and just to, move along. Cell phones are safe, just like we're told vaccines are safe, instead of just, why don't we do the research and let's look at independent studies. Let's not look at cell phone studies that are funded by cell phone manufacturers. Let's look at independent studies and let's see what the research says. And across the board, the research saying that it's either probably or definitely carcinogenic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so cell phones is really, in most people's mind, is if they are aware of EMFs, that is it. They're aware of, perhaps there is a problem with cell phone radiation, but there's much more to EMFs, electromagnetic fields, than cell phones, because these frequencies are all around us. So can we talk to that a little bit about, these other dangers? How do you see these dangers?
Sure. So, with the advent of electricity, with the advent of the light bulb, with the advent of refrigerators, televisions, computers, anything that you plug in, all devices emit EMFs. So, I think the key is to minimize that exposure the best you can. So when we're looking at, let's say everybody's got Wi-Fi today. Most people have Wi-Fi in their home. Either turn it off when you're not using it, which is typically at night. So you can cut your exposure to EMF in half if you just turn the Wi-Fi off when you're asleep. That's a good practical step number one. We have a whole house filter for EMF that is a device that, and I'm not going to mention it because we're not promoting a device, but we have a device that's been developed by some pretty top-notch scientists from Russia that help to minimize your damage that's done from EMF in your home.
You can measure it. You can mention it. It's not a problem.
Okay. The device that we use is called a wave rider. And it's a device that was developed by Dr. Igor Smirnov, who was commissioned to investigate, after the Chernobyl accident in the 80s in Russia, why there were certain groups of people that didn't get cancer, and there were a lot that did. Mm-hmm. And what they found was that the people that didn't get cancer, even though they were exposed to the same radiation, were ones that were drinking a certain water that was exposed to a certain magnetic resonance that other people weren't drinking. And it's a long story, too much to go into here, but he translated that magnetic resonance into a machine that can produce that magnetic resonance. We talked about the Earth having a magnetic field and our bodies being magnetic. And so he created a machine that mimics the same positive magnetic exposure that people were exposed to at Chernobyl, and that they didn't get sick. They were exposed to the radiation, but their body didn't know it. It essentially acted as a kind of like a cover for the radiation, to where even though their bodies were being exposed, they didn't react, that their genetics were not affected. So that we have that for our house. But if you don't have that, if you don't have access to it, at least turn off the Wi-Fi, right? Hardwire a computer if you can, rather than having Wi-Fi. I'm downstairs in my basement. I'm at my computer. I've got a hard wire into my computer. I'm not on Wi-Fi right now. Uh-huh. So, that's a couple of things that you can do. Sleep, away from circuit breakers if you can, and away from large appliances. If you've got a smart meter, which again, I don't think is all that smart, for $100, you can build what they call a Faraday cage around it to where you're not getting exposed to the radiation. One of the ladies that I interviewed for The Truth About Pet Cancer said that when they installed the smart meter into her home, it was in the room where her dog always slept. And the dog just was having insomnia, couldn't sleep, was sick. And then once they moved the dog to the other room, dog was fine again. So what was happening there? Well, the smart meter industry would tell you that was just a coincidence. But the reality is, anybody that's got a brain that thinks logically would say that the dog was getting sick from the smart meter. So don't sleep close to it. So, those are things that you can do. There's a lot of different types of devices and defenders and shields and all sorts of things. I'm not going to promote any particular one, but all of our devices have those on them. We've got shields. We've got a EMF mitigator in our house. So we're big believers in using whatever filter you can to get rid of the exposure to the EMF and the dirty electricity.
Yeah. And yeah, the smart meter, that's just worthy of a side note here. Just for people who are listening that don't know what that is, so it's this often wireless, but not necessarily, but it's a utility meter. It can be gas, it can be electricity, which sends information back to the utility company. And so they don't have to have the guy come around, the meter guy, to read the meter. And this is supposed to save money. And but there's all kinds of issues, privacy issues, notably with regard to this, because the utility company can know exactly what you're doing really in your home, because everything emits a frequency, because everything is about frequency. But certainly in terms of electrical devices, they know. And these smart meters, like the one that you were mentioning, so that would be a wireless one, I'm guessing. So it's just like having another layer of radiation emitting device, another radiation emitting device in your home, which you've got no control over. Obviously there is a means of shielding, possibly. Depends where it's situated, but or there can be a smart meter which sends through the power line, broadband over power line, which is another form of electro pollution, because it's polluting then your power line, and you're reliant on your power line for to power all your devices. So it's a no-win situation, unfortunately. So that's as a side. But let's just talk about wearable tech, because this is another biggie. Because again, people, they love the whole wireless thing, and there's so many devices, the Google Glass, the Apple Watch, the Fitbit, and because, we are in a culture where, particularly, in North America, where there are big problems, health problems, obesity, and so on. So people need to keep fit, but can you just speak to that?
Sure. So, Lloyd, we've already got tons of studies that have shown us that, the cell phone radiation can affect the human reproductive system, that can make you anxious, disrupt sleep, cause mood swings, and all kinds of stuff like that. So now we've got this next generation of wearable devices, whether it's like watches or glasses, or I've even seen shirts now that have the chips built into the shirts and into the pockets. And so your body is like this giant conductor now for all this radiation, for all this electricity. So I think the problem is that we've got to try to mitigate the exposure to the radiation the best we can with the areas that we have control over. So like you mentioned, when living in a big city or in a house or in a condo, there's only certain things that you can mitigate your exposure to. You can't stop. I mean, we're getting pelted with all kinds of chemicals in our air too, but you got to breathe. So you don't have any control over that, but you do have control over some of this wearable tech that can decrease the amount of exposure that you have to radiation, which is either possibly or definitely a carcinogen. So why wouldn't we try to mitigate that? Because the wearables, they're using the same technology as a Bluetooth, right? They're using the Wi-Fi technology. So like smartphones, right? The wearable tech is emitting radiation that then goes back to the other device or to the tower or wherever it's getting the signal from. So you just added another layer of exposure to radiation. But worse than a cell phone or worse than a cell phone or an iPad or any kind of any kind of a device that's not on your body. Like I can take my cell phone, set it out of the way, and it's 20 feet away from me for the entire day, except when I check messages. If you've got wearable tech, it's on you all day, every day. And if it's getting pinged, if it's getting radiation, signals being sent back and forth from the tower or whatever, if it's a watch, you're getting radiation pings all day long, boom, 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 on your skin. If you're wearing something like a shirt that's got wearable tech in it, or if you're wearing glasses that have wearable tech, that have the chips in them, then you're getting radiation right here at your brain all day long, just like you would if you're talking on your cell phone. But at least if you talk on your cell phone for 30 minutes, it's only there 30 minutes, then you put it down. If you're wearing it, it's on you. So I think wearable tech is while it's convenient, is one of the worst ideas that I've ever seen when it comes to health, because it's always on your body, it's always on your person, and you're consistently all day long getting exposed to that, even if it's low level, it's radiation.
Yeah. And we can be fooled into thinking, for instance, with the Fitbit, there's a justification for it, and that the benefit that we have from having this wonderful device, which is counting how many steps and, is a real motivator in terms of your weight loss or fitness objectives, then it's totally justifiable. But it's not, clearly, because when you look at the studies, when you understand that this radiation, you've got that thing on your wrist, and that radiation penetrates your skin. Your skin does not stop the radiation. It goes through your skin, and it impacts all your cells in your body potentially. And who knows what happens after that. It can be just fatigue, it can be headaches, or it can be cancer.
Yeah. And Lloyd, that's why, everybody's been to the dentist's office, and they queue you up for an x-ray, and they put the vest on you, and then they hightail it out of the room. Why do you think they do that? Because it's dangerous. The radiation's dangerous. Now, we're not saying that this is the same type of radiation that's in an x-ray, but the cumulative effect of low-level radiation can be much worse than the high-frequency EMF. If you get exposure to 5 seconds of high-frequency EMF, like an x-ray, or 2 seconds, what's more damaging in the long run? 2 seconds of that once a year, or 24 hours, 7 days a week of low level every day of the year for a 10-year period?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where we're going with the studies, and this is what we're now beginning to understand, is because the utilities and the cell phone companies and so on, they're wanting us to believe that it's all about the power, it's all about the energy, because this is low energy, that it's safe. But now we know that's not true, and that there are these subtle effects, these these various adverse biological effects, and it's not so much the energy that's there, it's the fact that it's 24/7, and it's the nature of that signal. It's just totally alien we've never had anything like it before. We did not evolve to live in these frequencies, to be bathed in these frequencies 24/7. So
yeah, good point.
Yeah. So listen, is there anything, we're running out of time. I want to ask you, is there anything that you would like to share with the viewers here on this question before we go?
I would just encourage people to take practical steps to minimize your exposure to the EMF, much the same way that I do whenever I'm talking to people about cancer. And sometimes you feel overwhelmed. And so I know I don't, and I know you don't, Lloyd. We don't want people to watch this and say, "Oh, there's nothing I can do." It's just there. Well, yeah, there is. And whether it's one thing that you can do or 5 things, little tidbits, takeaways that you've gotten from this interview or other interviews, just implement small steps, because in the long run, they can make huge differences. So, when somebody's diagnosed with cancer, one of the first things that I'll mention to them is you need to change your diet, probably. Start exercising. Things that are basic. Start sweating. It's not rocket science, but make little changes, and then you can go on and continue to make more changes, but you got to start somewhere. So I think the same advice or admonition would apply here. Don't think that there's nothing you can do, because the EMFs are everywhere. Take a few, positive steps in the right direction after, you gain some insight from this interview or somebody else that you've heard. Start turning off the Wi-Fi at night. Start taking the cell phone and get it off of your person and set it down on a desk 15 feet away from you during the day. If you work at an office, only check it a few times. Don't be on it all the time. If you have to talk on the speakerphone instead of putting it up to your head. Turn off the Wi-Fi or turn off other devices at night when you sleep. Not the refrigerator, but there's other devices you can turn off. There's just practical things that we can all do. Don't use the wearable devices. I know they're cool and all the kids want them, but just say no to it. There's just practical things that you can do to start going in the right direction. And then you can take the next step. And I know some people will say, you know, I sleep in a Faraday cage and I do all these things that people may be overwhelmed and I can't do that. Well, then don't. Do what you can. But just take some positive steps in the right direction. It'll be really beneficial for you and your family in the long run if you just get a few takeaways and start implementing them.
Yeah, great advice. And just very lastly, because you're a father, I know you've got a big family.
Yeah.
This is the reason I started my website in 2009, because I've got kids too. So if you could just talk to that, because I know you've got mine are a bit grown up now. But how do we do that? How do we get this message over to our kids? Because they've had this since zero. You know, they've always known these technologies pretty much.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, it's funny. I'll talk to my kids and they'll say, "Wow, y'all were alive before the internet." Quite a while before the internet came around. But yeah, these kids have grown up with technology. So I mean, I think the main thing, one of the things that will surprise you, or that has surprised me, is that if you give kids good data, good research, good information, young kids, teenagers, they're very open to changing patterns of behavior if they find out that something might harm them. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to scare them and tell them a bunch of hypotheticals and what ifs, but if you show them the data, you show them the science, give practical steps to kids where they can minimize their exposure going forward, I think they'll surprise you. I know our kids have. Yeah. And I think that they're more than willing to do the things that they can so that they're healthy long term. Because the statistics are out there, the studies are out there, and we know that EMF can damage long term. The problem is, though, on the flip side of the coin, when you're that age, you know, you're 15, 20 years old, 10 years old, you think you're invincible. I did at that time. I mean, I thought that I was invincible. It didn't matter what I exposed myself to, I was going to live forever. And that's just kind of that mentality. So I think that's the challenge, because the youth, they do feel invincible. And it's until you get to be my age, I just turned 50, you realize that you're not, and you better start some practical steps. So I think the key with the younger generation is just to educate them, show them the studies, and just do it in a really matter-of-fact way, not trying to scare them, but just say, hey, read this. And I think that they'll surprise you.
Yeah. Great advice. Would you just like to remind the viewers where they can find more about what you do?
Sure. Yeah, the main website is thetruthaboutcancer.com, and you can go there. We've got thousands of articles up about nutrition and cancer treatments and detoxification and the whole gamut, just how to be healthy and stay healthy. So you can go there and you can sign up for our free newsletter and get educated. We got a lot of articles that we've written. I've written several on EMFs as well on that website. So thetruthaboutcancer.com.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, listen, Ty, thanks so much for being part of this EMF Health Summit. But, thank you for your outstanding contribution to this, to getting the word out about cancer, and the cancer is not a death sentence, because we've all got people that we've lost through cancer, and you really are a trailblazer in this.
Thank you, Lord. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation today. Excuse me. What you're doing is great work. It's very important. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for the kind words. And you just said it, and that's probably what we could leave the viewers with. Cancer is not a death sentence. There's always hope. So thank you for educating and spreading hope, Lloyd.
Thank you. And for all of you who joined us today, thanks for being part of this movement. Stay tuned for our next session. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.